Good morning. Welcome to today's lecture on interviewing, venue rules and techniques. This is a continuation of the previous lecture that was on interviewing of witnesses. Today I'm going to talk about the venue rules and the techniques that are used in interviewing. Briefly, as you have already noted, interviewing is a very important step in the forensic investigation process. Last time we discussed that interviewing of suspects is step number 6 in the forensic investigation process. It is very, very important because this is what makes an investigator. Documentary evidence, collection, analysis, and examination is more or less like the normal auditing. But when it comes to interviewing, this is where proper investigative skills are required. And therefore, interviewing separates the conventional auditors and the forensic auditors or investigators. Interviewing goes beyond the numbers. You forget about documents, I repeat, not entirely, and then you go to seek the word. The word is what will fill in the gaps in documentary evidence, hence completing the narration of how the incident took place and who were involved and how much got lost. Interviewing will give life to documentary evidence because documents will not explain reasons why and how it happened. But during the viewing, the witnesses and later on the suspects will be able to explain what happened in detail. Interview venue rules. When you come to the interview venue, first start with introduction, as we said in the previous lecture, that you first start with rapport building. During this, you must tell the interviewee that you are the person that is going to hear the story of what happened and then decide who should be charged for the offense under investigation. The interview room must be close to the crime scene and it must be very quiet. Why close to the crime scene? The subject of the interview may need to pull out a document, for instance, during fraud and corruption investigation. The suspect or the witness may need to pull out a document for you to see. So if you are at a far distance from the crime scene, then it's going to cost you a lot in terms of traveling costs and time involved. The interviewee should use a seat of the same height like that of the interviewer to avoid intimidation. The reason for this is to avoid intimidation. If you sit above the interviewee and look down on him or her, she will feel intimidated and even threatened. The interviewer must have one or two witnesses in the interview room or at the interview venue. It is important that you have people who will testify in your support in case the witness or whoever you are interviewing plays or tries to play mischief during interviewing or in the interview room. The interviewee should also have a witness of her or of his choice in the room. The door to the room should not be locked, and the interviewee should be told that he or she is free to leave the room anytime. The interviewee should be seated towards the door. The last 2 points will make the interviewee feel that he is not detained or imprisoned. This is so because during interviewing, the interviewee is supposed to willingly come into the interview room to answer questions from the interviewer. It is not by force, but by request. And therefore, the interviewee can choose to come or not. The interviewer is not allowed to imprison or detain the interviewee during the interview sessions. It is not allowed. The interview room must be small but decongested. It should only have a desk for the interviewee and the interviewer, and the same desk can be shared by the co-interviewer who will be taking notes in the room, and then chairs for the witnesses or for those accompanying the interviewee and the interviewer into the interview room, in the interview room. The interviewer or investigator should sit at a distance of about 4 feet from the interviewee. This will avoid invasion of the subject's body space and therefore hinder the free flow of information from the interviewee. When the interviewer sits too close to the interviewee feels threatened and therefore may not allow information to flow freely to the interviewee. Switch off phone so that there is maximum concentration during the interview. Do not allow movements in and out of the room. This will cause distraction and interruptions during the interviewing process. The person or persons accompanying the interviewer should not participate in the interview unless that person is or she is a co-investigator. What did the suspects expect, or the witness in that matter? Expects the investigator to talk to him or her with respect as a human being, equal human being. Expects the investigator to treat him as a human being. Expects to see fairness from the interviewer. Expects the investigator to ask him or her questions only touching on the case in hand. Expects the investigator or interviewer to pay attention to what he or she is saying. Commendation for accurate narration of what happened. You should, time from time, commend the subject of the interview for giving accurate narration about what happened. And this should be honest commendation, not flattery. Questions progression. What do you see on the current slide? This is my hand drawing, and it is meant to represent a funnel. So what does it mean? Do you understand the funnel? It is wide. It has got wide opening at the top and a small opening at the bottom. What is the use of the funnel? The use of the funnel is to channel oils or liquids into containers with small openings. That is why the funnel at the end is small, and at the top it is wider, so that you pour in a lot of liquid, but it squeezes itself into the container. This is depicting how questions should progress from the start of the interview to the end of the interview, and even during interrogation. What does it mean in relation to interviewing? It means, or depicts, this question sequence. Start with open-ended questions, which must be in the form of who, what, why, where, when, and how. These questions are open-ended, and they may require wrong narrations of what happened, who did it, why was it done, Where was it done? When and how? This will give the subject of the interview time to talk and talk until the information he or she has is exhausted. So it is like the wide opening of the funnel I displayed in the previous slide. Questions progression should be like a funnel. Start with general open-ended questions, and then you work your way down, moving from open-ended questions to squeezed sections, questions being depicted by the small opening at the bottom of the funnel. And these questions will be like closed questions used during admission seeking. You will move from open-ended to closed questions as you finalize your interviewing. As you do this, you must concentrate on listening and maintaining your eye contact, observing the non-verbal behavior of the subject of the interview. At the same time, you'll be taking notes, or you have your co-investigator take notes of what is being said, and also the observation on the body language of the subject of the interview. Alibis. These are the defenses by the accused person of having been elsewhere at the time an alleged offense was committed. It's like saying that he was not there, and therefore he should not be accused of any wrongdoing. Alibi is different from other defenses. The subject is here like saying that he or she was not present during the perpetration of the wrongdoing and the investigation. He or she might be saying that when the fraud took place, I was on leave, I was not present at the place of work, I was outside the country. And if there is enough evidence to support this, then the subject of the interview could be innocent, could be not knowing what happened. If it is true and there is evidence that the perpetration of the wrongdoing happened in he or her absence, in his or her absence. If there is no evidence that the subject of the interview was not at the crime scene and therefore was far away from the perpetration of the crime, then you should consider deducing the alibis. If there is no evidence, then you move to the next step of deducing the alibis. If there is evidence that he was not there, then you stop there. You need not to do anything. If there's no evidence to support his absence or his or her alibis, then you move to the next stage to diffuse the alibis. And the following techniques can be used. Number one, display physical evidence already gathered. Usually, this could be in the form of documents, and you should display this, and even what the documents of evidence implicating the subject of the interview, so that he or she knows that you have evidence that he did it and was around during the crime perpetration. Number two, discuss witnesses. Discuss what the witnesses have said about the subject of the interview who is giving alibis. What the witnesses' statements without going into details. Tell him or her what the witnesses have said about her. Tell her that the witnesses, witness number 2, number 3, number 4, have already indicated that they saw him or her at the crime scene. Discuss deceptions. And when using this technique, you have to discuss the accused's deceptions or irregularities during the interviewing. The purpose to appeal to the accused's logic in order to scold or degrade him or her. This technique is sometimes the only one available if physical evidence is lacking. As with other interview situations, the word lying should be avoided. During this process of diffusing alibis, to not talk about lying or falsehood, but talk about irregularities or answers not matching the questions asked. In simple terms, I'm saying that you should be indicating to the subject of the interview that is lying indirectly, not directly, saying that you are lying. Because if you say that you are lying, that is very direct and blunt. And that will make the suspect lock and then stop giving you any more information. Active listening techniques. There is no discussion that can end without touching on listening techniques if during interviewing. Listening techniques very important, because here what you are using is your ears to hear what the subject of the interview is telling you. So you must be actively listening in order to get the information being given by the subject of the interview. How do you do active listening? Paraphrase the subject's answer to let them know that you are listening and you understand. It is not easy for one to paraphrase accurately what he does not understand. So you must listen first, understand the statement or the answer from the subject, and then paraphrase it to him or her. That will make the subject of the interview understand or not that you are listening. Review the material with the subject to clarify the meaning of the statement. That is active listening technique number 2. Number 3, show respect for the subject, not their criminal behavior. You must be seen to be respecting the subject as a human being. Number 4, nod your head in approval, even if the interviewee is lying. As he explains his points, in response to your question, be nodding your head at some intervals in approval, even if the subject is lying. This will encourage him or her to talk more, because that will indicate that you are listening and you are acknowledging the information he or she is giving you. Active, effective listeners characteristics. Active listeners have the following characteristics, among others: maintaining eye contact with the subject of the interview, seeking clarification from what is said by the subject of the interview, repeating his or her statements to indicate to the subject of the interview that you understood what he or she said, to not interrupt, be attentive, pay close attention, do not rush the subject of the interview or interrupt her speech or response to your questions. Keep relevant, do not stray away. These are the characteristics of active listeners. How to detect deception? Yesterday, when we had a free flowing interactive session on interviewing, this question was asked, and I am happy and pleased to go through it again and then give you the indicators of a deceiving subject of the interview, either witness or suspect. Number 1, restlessness, repeating the questions. The person is not settled and is always repeating your questions. You ask a very clear question and then he repeats the question before he answers. It indicates that it's buying time to cook the answer to your question. Excessive sweating in a cold season. This means that he's belaboring the answers to your questions and therefore cooking them. Playing with the fingers, change in the complexion color. Some people, not all, change color when they are anxious or guilt of something. Excessive swallowing, swearing by gods or their mothers, avoiding eye contact with the interviewer, selective memory, Selective memory meaning that the person could be remembering things which are not related to the case under investigation, but seems to be forgetting the most important things which happened during the same time that touches on the case under investigation. Tenseness will indicate that the person is not truthful, defending the perpetrator or advocating lenience. You can test this by asking the subject of the interview what he or she thinks of the consequences of a person that will be caught having perpetrated the crime. If the subject of the interview advocates for lenience or defends or gives some reasons for defending the proved perpetrator, then that person is the perpetrator and therefore lying. Most of the responses to your questions must be lies. Concluding the interview, verify the witness subject story as you understand it. This can be done as follows. Ask the subject to make a commitment. Take note of the final words of the interviewee. Prompt the subject for additional information by asking, "What have I forgotten to ask you?" Number 2, "What have you not told me?" Decide if the interview should transition into interrogation or admission seeking or end with the interview phase. At the end of the interview, the interviewer has to assess and review the information given and then decide whether or not to proceed with the subject to interrogation. If the subject is most probably not likely to be involved, to have been involved in the perpetration of the crime under investigation, the interview will stop. But if the subject of the interview is most likely to be guilty of the crime under investigation, then that person must be moved to the interrogation phase or stage of the interview. And during interrogation, the subject will be asked to confess that he or she did it and then give reasons why, how, and with whom did he or she do the crime. During admission seeking questioning, there are some two techniques that must be used. Number 1 is the minimization technique. Minimization technique means minimizing the consequences of the conviction. It's like telling the subject of the interview that if you confess, then there will be lenience for you. And then number 2 is the maximization technique. This is like telling the subject that if you do not confess and they give us a confession statement, then you are going to like receive maximum sentence in a court of law because our evidences point to you as the perpetrator. That is the end of my lecture this morning. I can see some people are online, and I will give a minute or two for comments or questions, and then I hang up until later in the evening when I will come online with another presentation as from 7 p.m. East African time. You can calculate your time difference and know what time it will be. But as I know, most countries to the west have 2 to 3 hours difference. And the countries to the southern part of Africa have a difference of 1 hour, 1 to 2 hours. So you can be able to calculate the time difference and then know exactly what will be the time in your local, in your location. When I go live online at 7 p.m. East African time, I can see that there are no comments or questions, and therefore I hang up. Thank you very much for listening.